Single-issue politics seems to have become the order of the day, and no single issue, at least not recently, has been argued over more than abortion. Some in the media here in Oregon have predicted that the battle over this single issue will dominate politics in this state for years to come. But issues of reproduction are much broader than just abortion. Battles over funding of family planning services, research for new birth control methods, and providing birth control for teenagers are just a few of the reproductive issues that make up the headlines coming out of our nation's capital. Our speaker today is eminently qualified to discuss the politics of reproduction. Allie Stickney is the executive director of Planned Parenthood of the Columbia Willamette. I knew I was going to blow part of that. She came to Oregon in February of this year and said she had an appropriate Oregon welcome arriving in our frigid below freezing weather that we had back in February. She has had over 20 years experience in Planned Parenthood activities, including time as a volunteer and as associate director in New England. During this period, she's had to deal with the complex set of problems that have been included in reproductive health issues. She has seen the impact of politics of decisions affecting the personal lives of families seeking the help of Planned Parenthood. Speaking on the politics of reproduction in the 1990s, will you help me welcome Allie Stickney?
Thank you for your introduction, Bill, and thank you for the opportunity to address members and guests of City Club today. It was less than a year ago that I had my first introduction to City Club. It was a part of my job interview for Planned Parenthood. To give you some indication of the importance that Planned Parenthood attaches to City Club, I was told that as part of my interview schedule, I would be attending lunch here. Now, as a newcomer to Portland, I wasn't exactly sure of the connection between City Club and qualifications for leading a reproductive health agency, but I soon found out. At my table at lunch sat 3 members of the search team, 2 other Planned Parenthood board members, and 3 other community members who made clear their interest in the work of Planned Parenthood, and all of them were City Club members. It became clear to me that City Club has an active membership that cares very much about issues important to this community. The issue that I'm here today to address, I believe, is very critical to the health and well-being of the world in which we live. I'm here to talk about the politics of reproduction in the 1990s and to spend some time considering the implications at a national and international level. What do we mean by reproductive issues, and what do we mean by the politics associated with this issue? Is this, in fact, a polite way of saying let's talk about the abortion battle without using what has become known as the A word? No, not really. I want to address my comments to the broader topic of reproductive issues. While abortion is the crucible of most debates on women's health care or maternal and child health issues, and abortion has been used as a political club held over the heads of those considering a wide range of health programs, my intention is to flesh out the debate in a fairly broad sweep so we can touch upon many of the important issues within the reproductive health field. It's a little like a Voyager 2 trip into the universe of reproductive health. flying by several important areas that usually don't get much attention and focus, and need inspection at a closer level by concerned citizens of our community. The issues in the universe of Planned Parenthood that are part of today's consideration range from teenage pregnancy to contraceptive research to international family planning, as Bill has pointed out. These issues go to the heart of some of society's most intractable problems: poverty, overpopulation, achieving equality for women. And they go to some of society's most cherished ideals: healthy families, and bringing children into this world who can be adequately cared for, nurtured, and loved. But the truth is, over the last 9 years, since the advent of the Reagan administration, there has been a systematic attempt to reduce federal assistance to the programs that address all of these issues. While this is not unusual in the light of the overall cutback of federal funding to social services in this country, reproductive health and family planning issues have been singled out for special attention because of their connection to the issue of abortion. That is, anything that could be remotely tied to the provision of abortion services became tainted by that connection. The politics continue to this day, and the betting is that these politics will continue well into the next decade and the next century. It's been a lethal combination. A combination of topics that some people would rather not discuss, that is, sex and abortion. Issues that don't have a powerful constituency, young and low-income people, combined with issues to which a noisy minority is rabidly opposed. This combination has created a potent force in the legislative and administrative and judicial branches of government. The noisy minority has created a perception that family planning is controversial. Most politicians wish that the subject would just go away, and those in need of the services carry very little weight with the decision makers. Because of the politicalization of the issues, we are subjected to debate over topics that we all thought were long ago debated and decided. The importance of access to basic birth control services, the economic benefit of people being able to support the children they have, the impact of population growth on the economic and cultural survival of less developed countries. Many viewers of this scene have asked whether we in the U.S. are dealing with present realities or a world that some wish still existed but no longer does. A good example is the topic of teenage pregnancy. In this country, every year, there are 1 million teenagers who become pregnant. And we know that the endemic of teenage pregnancy occurs among young women of all income levels, ethnic and racial backgrounds, and geographic locations. There is no community in our society immune to the reality of teenage pregnancy, much as some communities would like to think there is. In fact, 4 in 10 young women will become pregnant at least once before they are 20 years old. We know that the rate of pregnancy among black teens has been decreasing, while the rate among white teens has remained the same. Of those 1 million teenagers who become pregnant, 40% of them choose to terminate their pregnancies. Over 1/2 give birth, while the remaining pregnancies end in miscarriage or spontaneous abortion. Among those teens who do give birth, fully 92% of them keep their babies. Only 8% of them relinquish them for adoption. We know that the maternal mortality rate for young mothers, teenage mothers, is more than double that for mothers aged 20 to 24. And how about the social consequences? Only half of all teenage mothers ever finish high school. And here is a staggering statistic. Fully 2/3 of all families headed by women who first gave birth as teenagers now live below the poverty level. With these figures, how do American people feel about dealing with these facts of life? Well, overwhelming majorities of us think that teenage pregnancy is a serious problem. We think that sexuality education should be taught in public schools, and that television should present messages about birth control as part of its programming. And how do our teenagers feel about seeking help to prevent unwanted pregnancy in the first place? Most teens wait 9 months to 1 year before coming to a clinic for information or contraceptive services after they have become sexually active. The reasons for delaying that visit have some familiar rings to them. They didn't expect to have sex in the first place. It just happened. They are afraid their parents will find out. They don't want their friends to think that they are sexually promiscuous, and starting to use birth control might prove that. They don't have the money. They can't find the transportation. They can't figure out a way to miss school and not let their parents know where they are. They're worried about having a pelvic exam. They don't want to see their private doctor, even if they do have one. Or they just broke up with their boyfriend and they're never going to have sex again. And the list goes on and on. Many of these reasons we do have some control over. We can openly encourage the importance of responsibility in sexual behavior and teach young people in our society that if one chooses to be sexually active, use birth control. We can make birth control much more accessible. We can provide transportation. We can excuse kids from school so they can get to a family planning clinic. We can take the courageous step that Oregon is taking with the implementation of several school-based clinics that provide general health services, including prescribing birth control on site. We could even go one step further and make sure that the contraceptives are actually provided on site instead of what we currently have, where teens must go outside the school and to a different location to actually receive the contraceptive supplies. When we compare ourselves with other countries, we see that we can do a better job. In a very important study published recently by the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, variables associated with adolescent fertility were studied, comparing this country with other developed countries, those of Western Europe, Canada, the USSR, and Japan. Case studies were also conducted comparing abortion, birth, and pregnancy rates in this country with those in England and Wales, France, Canada, Sweden, and the Netherlands. What was found was very revealing. In all comparison of rates, this country lagged far behind the other countries. Not only were our pregnancy and our birth rates higher, but our abortion rates were significantly higher. One might assume that other countries could have lower teenage birth rates, but this would show up in higher abortion rates. But this was not the case. Other countries are far more successful in keeping the pregnancy rates themselves much lower than those in the United States. The kids do not get pregnant in the first place, and it was not because they were less sexually active. When the reasons for the significant difference in these rates were explored, it became apparent that there were two main factors the other developed countries had in common and that the United States had not attained. The first one is the easy availability of all teens to birth control services without a social stigma attached to it. The expectation is to use a method of birth control if one is sexually active. To quote from the article, American teenagers seem to have inherited the worst of all possible worlds regarding their exposure to messages about sex. Movies, music, radio, and TV tell them that sex is romantic, exciting, titillating. Premarital sex and cohabitation are visible ways of life among the adults they see and hear about. Their own parents or their parents' friends are likely to be divorced or separated and involved in sexual relationships. Yet at the same time, young people get the message that good girls say no. Almost nothing that they see or hear about sex informs them about contraception or the importance of avoiding pregnancy. For example, they are more likely to hear about abortions than about contraception on the daily TV soap opera. Such messages lead to an ambivalence about sex that stifles communication and exposes young people to increased risk of pregnancy, out-of-wedlock births, and abortions. The second factor is the prevalence of more extensive sexuality education as an integrated part of the school system. In the U.S., our 5th grade film on menstruation, followed by 9th grade anatomy and physiology, followed by perhaps a 10th grade discussion on birth control methods, is not extensive enough for an issue that plays such a critical part in determining the future of young people. We would never assign such basic subjects such as math or writing skills to such a scattered approach with such a small investment of time in the overall. This spring, the Alan Guttmacher Institute completed a comprehensive survey of sex education courses offered throughout the country. The verdict? On an average, schools offer 6.5 hours per year on all sex education topics, and less than 2 of those hours are focused on contraception and sexually transmitted disease. In an attempt to deal on a more enlightened basis with sexuality education in the school system, the issues need to be broadened so that young people are given help in learning how to define their own values. How do we come to believe what we do believe? What do we believe? How do we learn to make responsible decisions in all areas of our lives? How do we learn to be responsible family members? What are the various roles we play in our lives as family members, as students, as brothers or sisters, as sons or daughters? What are the roles we play as men and women in this society? These are some of the important questions and concerns that kids need to address and that schools need to address if we're to make some headway in addressing the problems of teenage decision-making, self-knowledge, and self-image. Sexuality education cannot be a panacea for all the problems of teenage pregnancy, but it can help young people make informed choices within their lives about very important decisions. By teaching decision-making skills, we can hopefully arm our children with skills that go far beyond decisions about sexuality and bump into areas that are equally as important. Decisions about life, career, about the use of drugs and alcohol, about peer pressure in all areas of their lives, about family dynamics and how they communicate within their own families. And these discussions need to start at a very early age. 1/4 of all adolescents are sexually active before they enter the 10th grade. Even if we could make progress in reducing pregnancy rates and abortion rates among teens with more enlightened sexuality education and more accessible birth control services, there remains another large group of women who do not have ready access to basic birth control services, and that is low-income women. The primary mechanism that has been used to reach low-income populations in the U.S. with basic family planning services is Title X of the Public Health Service Act, which was first signed into law by President Richard Nixon in 1970 and has since been reauthorized 6 times. The current legislation for Title X expired in 1985. And since then, this country's only program specifically dedicated to the provision of family planning services to low-income women has hung by the thread of a continuing resolution. The program has been under constant attack, not only through attempted outright elimination of the program and the legislation, but through amendments which would seriously hamper the effectiveness of the program itself. Since the advent of the Reagan administration, there has been an attempt to eliminate Title X as a categorical grant or a specifically targeted program for family planning services and throw it into one of the 4 super block grants awarded to each state. Family planning would then become one of any number of programs that a state could choose to spend their money on within a broad range of social services. The betting was clearly that given the toehold that other programs already have, the perceived controversial nature of family planning, and the budget concerns of states, that state-funded family planning services would soon disappear or be drastically reduced. Congress, fortunately, saw this likelihood as well, and each year since 1981 has forestalled the total elimination of Title X funding. Because the defunding route has not worked, administration officials have tried other ways to cripple the effectiveness and the intent of the legislation. In a now infamous letter from President Reagan to Senator Jesse Helms, former President Reagan announced, "I'm sorry we did not have the votes to defeat Title X family planning legislation. We will now have to try to accomplish this through the administrative route of rules and regulations." End of quote. One such rule being fought in the federal court system would prohibit any family planning clinic that receives federal funds from providing counseling and referral for abortion services, even if patients ask for such information. Despite massive opposition to this regulation from all major health organizations in this country, including the AMA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Public Health Association, the proposed regulation was not withdrawn. The implementation of it has been blocked through federal court action, but it remains on appeal by the federal government, and Planned Parenthood's current government contract, the one that our affiliate has here in Oregon, specifies if this rule were ever to go into effect, we would be bound by it. Another regulation that has also been proposed for addition to the Title X legislation is the so-called squeal rule, which would have required family planning clinics to notify parents when their teenagers received contraceptive services. Again, despite overwhelming evidence that this regulation would not encourage family communication, but would simply keep teens away from seeking needed birth control services, the regulations were not withdrawn. Instead, they were brought forward for implementation and again immediately met by lawsuits filed by Planned Parenthood and the major network of federally funded family planning agencies in this country. These two regulations are not behind us. Another version of the teenage squeal rule lays in wait to come forward in different form on any reauthorized Title X legislation. Another often discussed but never proposed federal regulation would prohibit agencies that provide abortion services with their own private funds from being eligible for federal funds for their family planning services. This has been attempted at a state level and has either been defeated legislatively or thrown out by the courts. But remember this one because it comes up later in the discussion of international family planning assistance. We know that the investment in family planning makes good economic sense. On the face of it, it would seem that the provision of services to families to provide the mechanism to control their fertility and determine the number and spacing of their children is a good thing to do. Data bear out this common sense assumption. For every dollar spent on family planning by government in 1 year, $2 are saved the following year in health and social service costs associated with unintended births. For teens, the savings is even more significant. For every dollar spent in the first year, $2.90 is saved in the next year, and that is a very conservative figure. Some estimates say the savings are as high as 8 to 1. A 1986 report by the Center for Population Options showed that in 1985, taxpayers spent $16.7 billion for the services required to maintain families of teenage mothers. What is the extent of the underserved or unserved population in need of subsidized family planning services? In 1983, the last year in which accurate statistics are available, 56% of the low-income women in need of family planning services and 69% of sexually active teens in need of basic family planning did not obtain care. Since 1981, the Department of Health and Human Services has not gathered any statistics on the need for family planning in this country after funding for the data collection was eliminated. All research connected with the provision of family planning services is now carried out by the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is privately funded. In a footnote to the Politics of Reproduction, AGI, as it is known, has had all its government dollars taken away because it gathers statistics on abortion and uses the A word in its publications. The current funding level for family planning through Title X is now $137 million. This is down from $162 million in 1980. Let me repeat. The amount of money we spend in this nation on the prevention of unwanted and unintended pregnancy is $137 million. I have been told, but I can't verify it, that this is less than we spend on the Army Band each year. It is an incredibly small amount of money, and we have had to undertake a Herculean effort just to maintain it at that level. All of this has happened in the very same years that abortion has occupied center stage with its emotional and oftentimes violent debate. When we have had two presidents call for a constitutional amendment to ban abortion, and when those who provide family planning services have been accused of encouraging abortion. It is estimated that each year 800,000 to 1 million unintended pregnancies are averted through the federally funded Title X program. 425,000 of those among teenagers, and that there would be an additional 300,000 births and 400,000 abortions if it were not for the services provided through Title X. Something is very wrong with this picture. The one federal program that is exclusively devoted to reducing the need for abortion is targeted for elimination, and when that has been prevented, is funded at decreasing levels of support. What is the profile of a Title X patient? Well, she is young, low or marginal income, and does not yet have children. 69% of the patients are white. 80% of them have incomes that are close to the federal poverty level or below. And what sorts of services are provided by the Title X funded program? There are medical and informational services, a complete gynecological medical exam, including pelvic and breast exam, cancer screening through a Pap test, diagnosis and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, screening for diabetes, high blood pressure, rubella, and anemia, education on all methods of birth control, and pregnancy testing and diagnosis, with information given about all options available if a pregnancy test is positive. Over 5 million women receive these services yearly, and this year an attempt will be made once more to formally reauthorize the Title X legislation and to rescue it from the fate of ongoing, continuing resolutions. Led by Senator Jesse Helms and Orrin Hatch, those opposed to Title X have convinced their colleagues to block its authorization until now. There is hope that the changing tide precipitated by the Supreme Court's decision in the Webster case, allowing severe restrictions on access to abortion services, will convince enough fair-minded and intelligent members of Congress that preventative birth control services are worthy of congressional support and approval. Another topic for congressional consideration is funding for research into birth control methods. Much has been written, studied, and debated about the safety and efficacy of various birth control methods in this country, from the pill to vasectomy. The truth is that in this country, we do not have many methods of birth control from which to choose. If one does not choose sterilization, which must be looked at as a permanent method of birth control, then what remains is essentially the pill, the diaphragm, contraceptive foam, and condoms. Only recently has the IUD again become available to American women, but even then it is only available to a very small percentage of women because of its side effects and their potential impact on childbearing. There is little else to choose from. But each year we spend only $9 million on research into contraceptives, new contraceptives. While the abortion debate again has taken center stage, we spend a very small amount of money to find new, safe, effective methods of contraception that can answer some of our questions that current methods pose. There now is only one company conducting any contraceptive research in this country because of several reasons. One, little or no federal support for such research. Two, the very high cost of liability insurance. And three, the disturbing dynamic that has been labeled medical McCarthyism. Ultra-conservatives have pressured both government and private industry to avoid any connection with the researching or bringing to market of any products that have any connection whatsoever with abortion or a perceived connection with abortion. This includes drugs that have potential benefit beyond any connection with reproduction. RU-486 is such a drug. While RU-486 acts to terminate a pregnancy in its very early stages, it also has other unrelated potential benefits. To date, we have not been successful in bringing RU-486 into this country from France. Recent legislation has been introduced in Congress by Congresswoman Patricia Schroeder, which would significantly increase the amount of money through the National Institutes of Health for contraceptive research. But unless past patterns of holding such proposals hostage to anti-abortion harangues in the chambers of Congress are eliminated, then we will still have virtually no federal effort directed toward research into more and better contraceptive methods. When we turn to a global perspective on these issues, we find that on the world stage, the same play is running: an inability to expand funding for needed family planning services. In fact, this country has done internationally what the administration has not been able to do domestically, and that is to withdraw funds for international population assistance because of perceived connections with the provision of abortion services and information. All of this has happened at a time when it has become apparent to leaders of less developed countries, the so-called third world countries, that population pressures severely hamper their ability to deal with their own social, economic, and political pressures, and that help is needed. No longer is there a suspicion that a plot exists among the developed nations of the world to reduce the prosperity and power of less developed countries through population control. Help is now eagerly sought and earnestly sought. And no wonder. Reality is so overwhelming and cannot be ignored. In 1988, the world population exceeded 5.1 billion people, which is double the population that lived on the earth in 1950. There is wildly significant variation in population growth rates between more developed countries and less developed countries, so that 95% of future population growth will occur in less developed countries and more impoverished countries. The population of Africa is expected to double in the next 24 years, while the population of Kenya will double in just 18 years. By the year 2000, the world's population will increase another 20%.